So today marks the start of a vlog series centered around D&D. So I thought the only way to actually start this video is with a roll. So that's a 3. Hello, everybody. Happy Friday. Hopefully the week has treated you well. And yeah, welcome to, like I mentioned in the intro, the first video in a brand new series that I'm going to talk about D&D. I mentioned in last week's video that these vlogs and whatnot, I want to make the content I want to. So I thought, let's take what I love with D&D and doing vlogs and bam, make a sandwich of just magic, hopefully magic, and happiness. There's so many tutorials and how to create characters step by step. I wanted to do something a little bit more personal with this video and this series, where I'm going to talk about my process in creating a character and how I play D&D. So today's video is going to focus in on how I make my characters. And hopefully this is kind of a fun little look for people who they want to get into D&D and they're kind of worried because there's so much resources and there's so many different opinions on how to play D&D and all that. Hopefully this is a fun little resource to show you that you can really go about this any way you want to. And this is just one of the ways to start. So I think, should we get into it? I think we should. Ooh, I'm so excited, y'all. You have no idea. Like, legit, I'm so happy to do this. So step number 1 in my process, I actually start visually. I know a lot of people probably they start with their backstory. They start by looking into all of that. I actually figure out the physical appearance of my characters first. I've always been a visual learner. I've been a visual person, and I found that if I don't create characters this way, I'm never really attached to them and I have trouble connecting and figuring out who they are. So I start with actually picking my character race in game, which I typically play only monstrous races. And what that means is I typically only play tieflings, orcs, like non-humans. This is a world of fantasy and make-believe. The last thing I want to do is play a human. I already do that in my day-to-day life, and I'm not going to do it in this game that helps me escape. I've also found this helps me out because I'm not an actor. I have trouble like getting into a character and whatnot, and I weirdly found that being able to play like such a different, like playing an orc, playing something that's just so out there in fantasy, that it helps me disconnect from my own body. Like, I'm not making this choice as me, I'm making this choice as the character. And it's one of these early steps that I do to help me figure out just how to like live my character a bit more. And you don't have to do this really quick. You don't have to do this. There's so many ways to play D&D, and like some people just don't really get into the RP side of things and whatnot. I really do. It's one of my favorite parts of D&D. So again, I preface this that this is just my process in going about it. I also tend, and I'm sure that there's going to be people like, boo, 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 boo. I make my characters like built. Maybe it's a little bit of like the male power fantasy. I don't really know. But I tend to make my characters tall and built. It all boils back down to the world of fantasy and escapism. I've lived with like chronic pain in my life since I can remember. And if I can play a fantasy escapism game where my characters are beautiful and they're strong and they're just, I guess everything in my brain of like, quote unquote, kind of what I wish I could be this. Why not? There's just something really exciting about it. And you play like tiefling, they have horns, they have all of like it's really, really cool. And what you can accomplish with like, oh, this is a tiefling character that has horns. What if they have like dangly bits from their horns? Or like, oh, it's an orc. Okay. What if they have like a giant chunk of their ear missing? Like, this is where the character honestly starts forming a lot more for me than in the backstory, because I can start breaking down of like, okay, this character has earrings here. This character has earring here, their nose piercing, like they've got tattoos. And it helps me just figure out the like meat and potatoes of the character. Why would someone, okay, they have this giant scar on their face. Okay, why do they have this giant scar and whatnot? And you see how, at least for me, that gets the ball rolling more than me looking into a book and like, oh, okay, so this world, these people do this and they do this and they do this and whatnot. Once I see the visual of my character, my brain jumps like fast forward into all of the like, okay, now let's turn this into a real person, which actually lends it to the next step in my process of creating my character. I want to make the players at a table that I'm at say WTF. Now, this doesn't mean I'm doing stuff to break the game. What I mean by this is I am always so excited at the idea of playing opposites. Let me give you an example. I have an orc character that I've built that hopefully one day I get to play like more games with him because I love him so much. But I have an orc character. And for the most part, when we think about orcs, we think of these tall, they're massive, so they're on the front line, they're ready to like beat you to a pulp, they're mean, they're all of that. My orc character is a sniper ranger because they don't want to be on the front line. They don't like blood. That is the kind of opposites that I love to find. And there's nothing wrong with like, especially if you want to play a character that fits kind of a mold and fits like stories that have been told, do you. Always remember throughout this whole process, if you're watching this, you're like, I want to make characters, just do you, play what you want to. All of my process is to help me get into character and get out of my own body. So this is one that really helps, where it's so much fun to me. I am so much more invested when I have just these polar opposite ideas that come together. I have right now in the Twitch game, I have my Furbolg Barbarian. Furbolgs, they love nature, they're connected to it and whatnot. And I was fully like, how do I flip this? I thought, okay, so Furbolgs, at least from my understanding, typically nature-based. They're connected to nature, they care about the life process and whatnot. So my brain instantly jumped to, what if you have a Furbolg Barbarian who refuses to do any damage to nature? It's their entire life. You protect nature, you do everything you can, but if a human being or anything else hurts nature, no remorse in unaliving them. And then with my home game, I play a half-orc tiefling, which I don't know, maybe someday I'll talk about it. It has a really cool story purpose and reason to why that's possible, but they're a rogue. But then my brain jumped into, why would a half orc, who, again, they're not as big as orcs, but they're pretty like beefy and huge. Why would someone like that be a rogue? And I jumped to, they're like the James Bond type of spy, who they can be spy and they can be sneaky, but they're also going to get in front of you and just beat your face in. My rogue I've built that way, they are more of like a strength rogue. Like they can be sneaky, but they are a brawler and they're a tank. Like they have the most hit points in my at-home game than all the other characters, I think. It might be tied. A lot of these reasons why I build the characters this way is it helps me continue to pick interesting choices in game. And you don't always have to pick interesting choices. This game is built on just like, okay, I go open the door and problem solving that's totally logical. But there's sometimes just something really fun about just making interesting choices. And it helps me to continue to inform my character. And I'm repeating that a lot in the video so far, but you see where how much, like, even just saying it out loud, it helps me just keep that character grounded and who they are. Because I think a lot of times I fall into a trap of, oh, I would make this decision here, I would make this decision here. And if I've done this whole process, it helps me be like, oh no, my character would make this decision here. I also typically don't do magic classes. I have no fault against them. I think magic classes can do some of the most like dope stuff ever. It's too much for my brain. I don't want to item manage. I don't want to figure out, okay, pick this spell and then blah, blah, blah. Like, if that's your deal, go off, because there's so many cool things you can do with magic. I don't want that. I'll play some characters that have a little bit of magic here or there. I don't know what it is. I just find so much joy in just going in, punching, swords, all of that. That brings me so much more like joy than staying back and casting magic. There's something cool about the problem solving that occurs, that if you have to get up close to an enemy and fight them, figuring out how you are going to survive in that situation. And it also gives me fun opportunities to flavor the way I like fight, which I'm not going to touch on in this video because that's going to be its own little video. But I've never been into, like, even in games and all of that, I've never really enjoyed the magic using. I don't know what it is. I really don't. There's just something about using the weapons or your fist that just in a game makes me feel so much more accomplished. And I think this also touches on, like, it's all about finding ways to make your character to have fun, right? This is a game all about fun. So make sure that you're building your character in a way that you will enjoy and you don't feel stuck and hating having to play them because you're not getting to play the way you want to. And now that we've picked our class, we move into the step that for me is justifying my choices. So now we're talking about picking your background and your subclass. So this is kind of where it gets a little bit more researchy heavy. You might be a little put off at this point. Just plow through and you're gonna be good. I promise you're gonna be good, because I've been at this point so many times where I've just, I'm done. I don't want to play anymore because I got to read through like what feels like 500 different backstories and subclasses and blah blah blah. Just you'll be good. This is where I get to justify my weird choices. Why is my half orc a rogue? Oh, okay. Well, they have the mastermind subclass, which is all about information getting and whatnot. So, okay, so maybe this orc, they were like a bruiser, they were a fighter, and they kind of fell in, they're good at getting information. And also it's a good way to put people on their toes of like, oh, this orc, half orc, tiefling, they wouldn't be a spy. They're not usually, you see, this is where it starts like coming together, where I can explain some of these weirder choices. So like Fell, I had to figure out, okay, why would this Furbolg, who I think Furbolgs are typically easygoing, chill, why are they this barbarian? And it was because, oh, they grew up nomadically, they're by themselves, they're a rebel refuge. I can't remember the exact name. And with that background, it would explain, oh, okay, they don't trust people. They've had to survive. They've had to make sure they had to do what they do to continue living. So it explained like, oh, that's why they're tough and they don't want to be around people and whatnot like that. I just love finding ways to, okay, sure, majority of people maybe play this background with this class. What if I take something that you wouldn't expect and put it there? What happens in that situation? And it starts creating these really fun conversations with people at the table and gameplay wise. And it just helps give me life and keeps me there. This is also kind of where I laugh because it's happened so many times now where my process potentially starts quote unquote breaking the game in a good way. It's not really breaking the game. It's just more so, I'll give you an example with Septimus. He has high strength and high constitution, which typically your rogues are going to have high dex and whatnot so they can move quick. He's beefy. I'm pretty sure he has 64 hit points and we're level 5. And then because he's a half orc, if he drops to 0 health points, he pops back up with the relentless endurance. He pops up to 1. And also because of his half orc traits, he also has a situation where if you crit, you get to add an extra damage dice to your full damage, which is amazing if I ever crit on a sneak attack, which is just a bunch of dice. It's so funny and it blows me away that like I don't go out of my way to do this. Again, it's literally just me wanting to play opposites of like sneaky boy. What's not sneaky? Oh, half orc tiefling. Barbarian. What's typically a barbarian? Oh, how about a furball? Like, it just stems from me wanting to have a visual different thing in my brain than what I would typically see or what I would think I would see. And like with Fell, so he's a barbarian, so he gets like double attacks and it's all about doing damage. But he's a furball, so he has disguise self and hidden step, which means he can turn himself invisible. And that's part of like, what's more terrifying than you're fighting a barbarian and then they go invisible? It just gets me so excitedly happy. Excitedly happy? I don't know if that's a word or if that's a set of words, but whatever. But it's like that. And it's like, okay, with Septimus the Rogue, like, oh, everybody, oh, rogues can be squishy, you knock them down. What happens when like you knock them down and they pop back up? Like, they look horrible, but they're ready to continue fighting. Or with my orc sniper, I built that class somehow. They're able to teleport forward a few feet. It's not a lot, but it's enough for that if they're sniping and they start being noticed, poof, they can like teleport and be somewhere different, which is also like, orcs are how tall and how massive. Like, if you were talking to an orc and then they just teleported behind you, oh, that'd be, oh my God. This is where I get the joy of my characters. How? What? Why does this work? And it does my heart so happy. Now, the final step of the entire process, rolling your stats. So this is kind of another spot where I kind of break things, not because I'm doing anything, but my partner Mia, like, you can even ask her. I am somehow amazing at rolling my stats. I'm pretty sure the like 3 of the characters I've rolled most recently, no negative modifiers. And for people that are new to D&D and want, you roll your stats, and depending on how high your number is, it helps determine if in a certain situation you add numbers to your roll or subtract. I know it sounds a little weird and potentially difficult, but it makes a lot of sense once you start seeing it out and whatnot like that. Now, I can already hear so many of you like, oh, that's boring, man. Bleh. I totally understand. If you have negative modifiers, it helps you figure out your character and like, oh, it makes sense character wise. I've done so much character building out of everything else in this process that when I get to here, this is where I want to be able to game and just be kind of good. Now, I do preface with, like, if I only have positive modifiers, I make sure that my characters story-wise will be bad at stuff. And I'll even give myself disadvantage in situations depending on the story. And I think this is going to be another spot where more so I talk about this in how I RP in a different video. But I make sure story-wise for me, I give them quote-unquote negatives. So while I'm not necessarily having like on my character sheet negative numbers, I'm thinking of situations of, okay, they wouldn't be super good at this and whatnot like that. So I keep aware of that. This is also where I jokingly say that min-maxer players probably hate me. So min-maxing probably has a whole bunch of different like descriptions and whatnot, but the way I think about it is people who want to be like the most efficient with their characters. They want to build their characters so everything they're doing is the most efficient and how like the best opportunities like to get the best out of your characters the way they're built. Nope, not for me. This is another part where like rolling my stats so well really doesn't create a horrible situation for the table, because I will make choices that typically may not be quote unquote the best for the character. So with my half-orc rogue, I gave him more constitution when we started off than like he had in dexterity, because I figured, oh, okay, he's a half-orc tiefling. He's big. He's beefy. He's not always going to be the best at sneaking, so he has to be able to withstand like getting caught and surviving interrogations, and he's used to taking like punches to the face and all of that. So I make choices that are more story based than gameplay based. I even had, when we first built that character, he had more strength than dexterity, because it made sense to me. He's a brawler. He's a brawler rogue, so he's going to have more strength than he would be sneaky. So it's all about just understanding, sure, is this going to maybe put me in like tough spots that you wouldn't expect for this class? Yes. All the yes. But do you see how like that even creates a little bit of like, well, how do we figure out this situation? I've heard so many experiences of how people problem solve situations in D&D from a character build that's pretty like, okay, yeah, that's how a rogue would figure it out. But what happens when your stats don't line up with that, or you've built your character differently? How do you figure out a situation? Oh, it gives me so much joy and it makes me so happy in those moments. So stats are rolled. This is where I typically will go back and like tweak visual stuff. This is kind of where just all the putty comes together and I can figure out, okay, so the character doesn't have a chunk out of their ear or stuff like that. I'm trying to make sure that I'm not forgetting anything. I'm pretty sure I did. And I know that my process does change depending on everything. Like I don't always stick to this. This is just kind of typically how I go about. But I really hope that at least maybe if there's someone interested in playing D&D, but they have problems of creating characters and they didn't know where to start, that maybe this is kind of a little bit of a guideline just to show you that start visually. I want to end this video though with just making sure that everybody knows there's no wrong way about doing this. Sure, there's like, oh, you can't necessarily do this because blah, blah, blah. But that's kind of where you can talk to your GM who runs your game and ask them, hey, can we do this in your world and whatnot? So never be afraid to reach out to your GM and ask them questions. Because like with my character, my half-orc tiefling, I really wanted to play that, but I had to figure out a story reason within our world that made sense. So I reached out to them and we had a conversation and made it happen. So just know that your GM should be on your side and should help you out with this. And there's no bad ideas. There's no bad ideas. There's ideas that may potentially break the game, and you don't want to be that player where you outright try to break everything. So maybe just don't do that. Don't be that type of person. But just remember that, at least for me, this isn't really a game. It's an experience. And that doesn't mean that it's not fun and whatnot, but that's what I love about D&D is it's such an experience where you get to experience combat, you get to experience RP, you get to experience magic that happens before your eyes. So just kind of go into it with that mindset of, sure, you're playing a game, and if that's how you actually want to play it, just a game, do you. Again, no wrong way to play. But just for those of you that want to go into this as an experience, just remember that and build your characters the way that'll help you just have an amazing experience. And with that, I think that's the end of this first video in this brand new series of me talking about how I kind of play D&D. The next video is going to hopefully be about how I kind of add flavor to my own RP moments. This is really cool. I'm really excited that I get to do this, and hopefully the viewing audience, y'all enjoy it, because I love D&D. I love D&D. It provides such an amazing escape, and it helps me get out of my head, which is constantly going. So hopefully it's fun and you all have fun on this journey of talking about this. And until next week, hopefully your dice rolls are high and you don't get any natural ones. I don't know how to add like a D&D like ending piece to this. It almost feels like the end of these videos are just turning into these weird little ranty rants that just show me like frizzled and all of that. So I don't really know how to end it. You can look at my dice. Oh, you can't see because of the mic. None of this works. I just kind of look at the dice. Ooh. I love you all. Till next week.
One, two, three, four.